All right, we're back in the second half of the book of Genesis, looking at the person of Joseph, one of the patriarchs, one of the founding fathers of the nation of Israel. I've mentioned this a few times. I'll mention it again. There's more written about Joseph than there is about Adam, than there is about Noah, than there is even about Abraham in the book of Genesis. His life spans 14 chapters at least of the book of Genesis, and we're just kind of making our way through his life, asking God, what do you have in this for me? If you missed week 1 or week 2, you can listen to it, you can watch it. I encourage you to do that, but let me take 90 seconds and do one of those previously on so that you can catch up and be ready for today. So Joseph, this guy we're talking about, 11th born son of Jacob, who happens to be the filthy rich grandson of Abraham. He's in this very important, very influential family tree. And Joseph's the 11th born son, but he's the favorite son of Jacob. And he even gets this, we call it the amazing Technicolor dream coat culturally today, but he gets this special coat from his dad, which actually makes envy just rise up and burn in the hearts of his 10 older brothers. Well, the story goes that the other brothers, the older ones, were off caring for the family's sheep herds in another area of the country, and Jacob said, Joseph, why don't you go check on him? And Joseph gets sent, and he travels a couple days. He finally runs into his brothers, and while he's still a ways off, they can tell that it's him, and they plot to kill him because of this envy that has come up inside of them. And they abandon the plan to kill him, but they do something that, at least in Joseph's mind, maybe was worse. They end up selling Joseph to a caravan of Ishmaelites who happen to be coming through town on that day. They sell their brother for a bag of silver coins into slavery. And they take Joseph's coat and they kill a goat, and they drag his coat through some of that goat's blood, and they let it dry, and they make their way back to their dad, and they say, Dad, we found this on the road. They lie to their dad. And Jacob holds this coat that he had given to his favorite son and makes the logical conclusion that his son had been attacked by some sort of animal or robbers and had been killed on the journey to see his brothers. And so Jacob thinks Joseph is dead, but Joseph is alive. There's breath in his lungs, and he's probably tied up in the back of a wagon on his way on a 250-mile journey to Egypt to be sold into slavery. And you're going to see this story play out over the next 4 or 5 weeks, and you're going to say, unbelievably, this serves as the providential hand of God on Joseph's life. I'm sure Joseph wasn't thinking that way that day. But we have the luxury of hindsight and seeing, man, God was actually taking care of him, because you're going to see more today. Watch this. So today we're in Genesis 39. We're only doing 6 verses today because there's a lot in these short 6 verses. I'm going to read you through all 6 of them, and then we're going to jump back in and dive deeper into the story. So here you go, Genesis chapter 39, verses 1 through 6. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, 250 miles, maybe a 2-week trip. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant, his right-hand man, his administrative assistant, the leader of his house. Potiphar put him in charge of his household and entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and of all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern him with anything except the food that he ate. There's a lot in these 6 verses. Let's read the first one again. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. So Joseph has gone from having the attention of his loving father to having the attention of people who are out trying to buy a slave. This is a true riches to rags story, at least at this point. It's terrible enough to be a slave in Egypt, but to go from having an incredible future in front of you and unfathomably large inheritance ahead of you in your life, to go from the top to the bottom. I mean, Joseph was likely naked. He was pulled out onto this stage in front of all of these people who don't even see him as a person. They just see him as a piece of property to own. And they're measuring him and they're sizing him up and they're trying to figure out how much he's worth as a slave. This is the life of Joseph at this point. I think it's fair to assume that in a lot of ways Joseph wishes that he had just been left in the cistern to die, because he doesn't know what's in front of him. Joseph doesn't understand anything that anyone's saying. He doesn't speak Egyptian. It's his first time there. His head's spinning. I've imagined what it was like to try to experience that first night in Potiphar's house. Potiphar, it says he's the captain of the guard, which essentially means that he's the chief of the royal police. He's a big deal. Pharaoh knows him and he knows Pharaoh, and he has a lot of power. He's the captain of the guard. Anybody could have bought Joseph, but in God's providential care, Potiphar's the one who buys Joseph. And I've pictured Joseph that first night in Potiphar's house. He's going to bed. His head is spinning. He's just had probably, I would say, the worst day of his life. And as he's laying there, who knows what he's thinking? But I imagine for a second he thinks, God, what are you doing? What happened to those dreams you gave me? What happened to the dreams where you were going to elevate me and other people were going to bow down to me? It feels like the opposite is happening here, God. I can't imagine that his faith, at least a little bit, wasn't shaken, that if he wondered if God cared about him at all. And yet in these 6 verses, we're going to see 4 ways specifically that God cares for Joseph, because he wakes up the next morning and experiences the providential care of God. It's hard to see it now, but you're going to see that God is going to take all of these things and he's going to make it good for Joseph and the people that Joseph loves. So there's 4 ways that I see God caring for Joseph. And believe it or not, they all start with P, which is going to help us remember this for the rest of our lives. The first way that I see God caring for Joseph is God gives Joseph protection. And he doesn't give Joseph protection from the circumstances, but he gives Joseph protection in the circumstances. He doesn't remove the hard things that Joseph is going through, but he protects Joseph in the hard things that he's going through. God chose to allow these events to unfold in Joseph's life. God allowed Jacob to send Joseph to see his brothers. God allowed this plot to be formed to kill him. God allowed his brothers, Judah, to convince his brothers, let's not kill him, let's sell him instead. God allowed these Ishmaelites to make their way through Dothan that day. God allowed Joseph to be tied up in the back of this caravan for 2 weeks to get to Egypt. God allowed him to be sold as a slave. God allowed him to be sold as a slave to Potiphar, the captain of the guard. God allowed these things to happen in his life, and he could have changed the trajectory at any time. God is powerful enough to just, any one of those things that I just mentioned that God allowed, God had the power to change it instantly. But he didn't. He allowed it to happen. Why do you think he let all of these happen? Why do you think he let all of these things happen? Is it possible? Is it possible that God wanted to teach Joseph something by allowing these things to happen that he could not have taught him if he didn't allow them to happen? Is it possible that if Joseph had just experienced smooth sailing and an easy ride to the top, that God couldn't have done in Joseph's life what he was able to do through these trials. God didn't protect Joseph from hard things, but he protected him in the hard things. And I highlight this briefly just to ask you the question, how is it going for you, and what is God currently allowing you to go through? I know enough of you, and I know enough of your stories to know that it isn't currently smooth sailing. And this isn't probably a brand new idea for you, but I'm wondering if it's a timely one. Simply for me to ask the question, is God allowing you to experience certain things right now because he's teaching you something that he could not teach you if it was all smooth sailing? I look back on 2024 and 2025. It's well documented. I've shared this many times with you that these have been two pretty challenging years for me personally. But I got to tell you, I have experienced the protection, the power, the presence of God in ways that I would not have, could not have, had God not allowed me to go through some of what I have gone through. And God has not protected me from hard things, from disappointment, from trial, but he has protected me in those things. And he has showed me more about himself in a way that he could not have if it hadn't been hard. Here's the second one. Not only did God provide protection for Joseph, but he also provided his presence for Joseph. We see a couple times there in the passage of Scripture, it says in verse 2 that the Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. The Lord was with Joseph. The presence of the Lord was with Joseph. And I don't know if you noticed this. Let me highlight it for you. His master saw it. Potiphar saw it. He witnessed it. And I don't think that's because Joseph preached a sermon to the other slaves. I don't think that it's because Joseph wore his church t-shirt. I don't think it's because he lived out loud. I think it's because he worked really hard. And I think that his character made it so that Potiphar saw that the Lord was with him. Potiphar could just tell. There's a spiritual dimension to those of us who follow Jesus that seems strange to those who do not. And as I say that, you might be tempted to think, me? And I would respond to that by just saying, man, have you made a decision to follow Jesus? Are you a Jesus follower? And if you would say yes to that question, then I would say, yes, you. There is a spiritual dimension to you that should appear strange to people that don't follow Jesus. I can't think of the presence of God without thinking about the disciples that were surrounding Jesus right before Jesus ascended into heaven. I don't know if you remember this story, but basically Jesus has been warning his disciples, his close followers. He's been saying, guys, listen, I'm not going to be here forever. And, every time the disciples are like, well, what are we going to do without you? And they kind of stress out every time Jesus mentions it. And then finally, Jesus gathers them over there on the side of the mountain, and only his closest followers are there. And then he gives his grand finale speech. We've nicknamed it the Great Commission. This is in Matthew chapter 28. He says, listen, guys, here's the plan. I'm going to head out of here in a second, but here's what I want you to do. I want you to baptize people. I want you to make disciples. I want you to teach them everything that I've taught you. I want you to help people follow me. And at this point, the disciples, their eyes are just getting wider and wider, and in their minds are just thinking, wait, like, without you? Like, you want us to do this? You want us to help people follow you, but without you? Jesus, you're kind of the secret sauce here. Like, they're not going to follow us. They want to follow you. You want us to do this? And then Jesus just drops the hammer on them. One final line. He says, surely I will be with you even until the end of the age. What Jesus was saying in that moment is that I have chosen that the Spirit of God would make his home in your hearts. In other words, my presence is never going to leave you. There is a spiritual dimension to you that is going to seem strange to people who do not know me, who do not follow me. And it just speaking very practically now, if we actually believe that, if we believe that the Spirit of God has taken up residence inside of us, those of us that have made this decision to follow Jesus, we believe that the Spirit of God lives in us, guides us, speaks to us, helps us. If we actually believe that and we live this Spirit-filled life where we love our neighbors and are humble towards our spouses and speak highly of them and reject gossip when it begins to grow at the table, and when we forgive people who do not deserve to be forgiven, when we hold money loosely and we're generous to people that are in need, when we live in the face of uncertainty and even tragedy with this calm, this hope, this assurance, this joy, when we live a Spirit-filled life, then the people around us can't help but experience what Potiphar experienced. Potiphar just saw it. He said, there's just something different about this individual. The presence of the Lord is with him. And so Potiphar raises him up. He says, I want you to be my right-hand man. There's something different about you, and I need to be around it. I want more of it. And so not only do we see God protecting Joseph, not only do we see God giving his presence to Joseph, but we also see that God causes Joseph to prosper. He gives him prosperity. It says both in the field and in the home, which means that the corn and the wheat grew up taller than it probably should have. And all of Potiphar's fruit trees were just loaded down with fresh fruit. And when the rains came and there was a little bit too much rain and every other neighbor had to deal with some water damage to their house, that at Potiphar's house, for whatever reason, no problem. There wasn't drama among all the slaves. They were being well led. Everybody knew their job. They didn't run out of important supplies because Joseph was managing it and making sure that everything in the house was taken care of. Neighbors got the stomach bug, not Potiphar's kids. People walked by Potiphar's lawn, they're like, he must use True Green because this is just special. And of course, I'm making some of this up, but this is what it would have been like to live in the house of Potiphar at this time. The Lord blessed the house of Potiphar because of Joseph. This is what it says in verse 2. The Lord was with Joseph, and so that he prospered. He lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything that he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his whole household. He entrusted everything into Joseph's care. From the time he put him in charge of the household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. Joseph, I think it's fair to say, may have lost his coat, but he didn't lose his character. And because of this, God allows him to prosper. He gives him success. It sure seems to me like Joseph was being faithful with a little bit, and God chose to say, this man looks reliable. I'm going to give him more because he can handle it. You know, Joseph was dealt, let's just call it what it is, a brutal hand. Even though he's going to be used by the Lord in ways that are almost incalculable, I'm still not sure Joseph would have chosen this life. I mean, he is dealt a brutal hand. He's saying, I am here, I am in Egypt, I am a slave, I have no friends, I have no family, I don't speak the language, nobody has a clue who I am. But at some point, I don't know when, I don't know if it was the first day, I don't know if it was the first month, I don't know if it was 2 years after he got to Potiphar's house, I don't know. The text doesn't tell us. But at some point, Joseph said, I'm going to make the most of this. I'm going to make the most of this. It doesn't say that he went to Potiphar and said, "Can I tell you about my family?" It doesn't say that he went to Potiphar and he said, "Hey, the Lord is with me." The text leads us to believe that Joseph put his head down and he swept and he did dishes and he said, "I'm going to be the best slave that this pagan has ever had." And he shows his character through faithful service to the household of Potiphar. He says, "I am going to make the most of this." He doesn't try to elevate himself. He lets Potiphar elevate him because of his character. This reminds me of a story. Do you guys know who John Bunyan is? I looked this up and I first typed in, "Tell me more about Paul Bunyan." That's the lumberjack, but when it's not who I'm talking about. Do you guys know John Bunyan? John Bunyan was a Christian preacher in England. Grew up in a very poor home, becomes a Christian as a teenager, essentially studies himself into becoming a Baptist preacher. And then he's thrown into prison because he doesn't have a license to preach. And he's given opportunity after opportunity to come out of prison as long as he promises that he will no longer preach about Jesus. This is in the 1600s. And Bunyan finds himself in a prison cell. And the story goes that they're in his prison cell. He didn't have much, but he did have a wooden chair. And Bunyan looked at this wooden chair and he broke off one of the legs. And then with one of the legs of the wooden chair that was in his cell, believe it or not, he made a flute. And he would play music that would echo down the halls of this prison. And he taught himself even to play songs, play hymns, play these songs about God. I'm just picturing the prison guard just like walking down, just facing snarling and bitterness and anger from every other prisoner, and he gets to the last cell and it's like he's just playing the flute, playing songs to the Lord. You want to talk about making the most of it. You want to talk about taking the hand that you're dealt and making the most of it. He went on to write from that very cell Pilgrim's Progress, which has been translated into hundreds of languages, and I would propose is the second most important book that has ever served Christianity behind the Bible. You want to talk about making the most of it. There is something powerful and there is something holy about taking the hand that you have been dealt and making the most of it. I'm not proposing that you're not having a tough time in some area of your life. Maybe right now you are in a tough situation maritally. Maybe right now when it comes to your children, it's tough. Employment-wise, with the people that you work with the boss that you have, with the people that you're leading, it's no fun right now. You've got a roommate situation that you say, "Man, this stinks." You've even got something going on physically where you're like, "Man, I don't know if I'm ever going to be the same." There's something powerful and holy about taking what you've got and making the most of it. And we see Joseph here making the most of it. He says, "I'm going to learn Egyptian. I'm going to sweep the floor. I'm going to humbly serve the other slave." Whatever he did, his character helped him to rise in Potiphar's estimation. And Potiphar chooses to make him his right-hand man. It's interesting, one more comment perhaps on just this prosperity that God gave to Joseph. The whole house prospered because God enabled them to prosper. They enjoy this fruitful harvest. All the cows are having healthy calves. They celebrated, they enjoyed delicious meats and fine wine, I'm sure. They prospered because God enabled them to prosper, which really flies in the face of this idea that the holiest, godliest way to live your life is not to prosper, but to have very little. That's an idea that can kind of get some momentum, especially if you're around a lot of people who have very little. Don't mishear me. I do believe, I agree with the Bible that the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. But I think it's important for us, as we talk about prosperity for a second, to agree that there isn't anything inherently more holy or less holy about being very rich or being very poor. I have known rich people, people that are very prosperous, whom money seems to have no grip whatsoever on their hearts. They know it's all God and they live that way. And I have met people who are dirt poor and all they can think about is getting more money. And vice versa. I've met rich people, that's all they care about, and I've met poor people that don't care about it at all. There's nothing inherently more holy or more godly about being very rich or very poor. Here is the key when it comes to prosperity. The command of God is to never chase prosperity, but to chase godly character, and then let the chips fall where they may. Let the salaries and the taxes and the opportunities and the deals and the investments, let them rise and fall as God enables them to do so. But the idea is not that we would ever chase prosperity, but that we would chase godly character. Because if at some point, if God just enables any one of us to be very prosperous in what we're doing, if we don't have godly character, it has great potential to ruin us, to ruin the people that we love, to ruin even our relationship with the Lord. And so we can't define success in this life as being prosperous. We define success as becoming like Jesus, so that no matter what God gives us, we can handle it, whether you're rich or you're poor. We see Joseph in this instance capable of handling this prosperity. And the final way that we see God caring for Joseph, not only does he give him protection, not only does he give him his presence, not only does he give them prosperity, but very practically speaking, we see Joseph, he gets promoted. We see God caring for Joseph by giving him a promotion. Potiphar put him in charge of his household. Everything that he owned, he entrusts to Joseph's care. Verse 6, Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care, because with Joseph in charge, he didn't concern himself with anything except the food that he ate. Joseph didn't ask for favors, but man, he found it, didn't he? Isn't it true that God, haven't you witnessed this, that God blesses certain people at certain times in certain places for reasons that we don't always understand? Just at different times, God elevates people to certain positions because he wants to use them. I don't see anything in this text that suggests that Joseph fought his way to the top, that he manipulated the other, that he talked poorly about so-and-so behind his back so that Potiphar would demote him so that Joseph could be promoted. I don't see anything about that. I just see the Lord lifting Joseph up to this position in Potiphar's house. Thursday morning this week, we were having breakfast. We've kind of got our little routine where the kids get up at 7 and they get ready for school, and then they come down the stairs and we have breakfast, and usually it's cereal, and every once in a while something else, but Thursday was cereal. And, sometimes it's music going on in the morning and we're kind of warming everybody up. Sometimes we're going to read a story. This Thursday morning was just quieter than usual. We're just sitting there, and Cooper, my 9-year-old, out of nowhere, she goes, "Dad, I have a question." And I'm thinking, this question's probably going to pertain to what she's having in her packed lunch. This is the depth of most of the conversations at 7:32 in the morning. And she says, "Dad, I have a question." I say, "Yeah, Coops, what's up?" And she goes, "What's my purpose in life?" I said, "What?" She said, "What's my purpose in life?" So I'm like trying to figure out how to answer that at 7:32 in the morning. And the first thought that came to mind was this combination of Matthew chapter 5, where we've talked about this, how we are lights in the world. And then Paul tells the Philippians, you're supposed to be like stars in the sky. Like that's what it's like to follow Jesus, to light up the darkness. And so I just kind of fired from the hip and I said something like, "Coops, our purpose, because we believe in Jesus, is to be lights in the world, to be like stars in a dark sky." And I thought, man, I just nailed that. And she's like, okay, just keeps eating her cereal. No follow-up questions. All right. But man, just her question made me really start thinking about that for us a little bit. And it made me start thinking about Joseph a little bit. And it made me want to ask you, what's your purpose in life? What's your purpose in life? And let me ask it another way. If you agree with me that God puts certain people in certain places at certain times, where does God currently have you? Do you think that the place that you live is an accident? Do you think that the place that you work is random? Do you think that the family that you're in is a coincidence? Do you think the schedule that you have this week coming up just fell into place randomly? Or can you agree with me that God puts certain people in certain places at certain times for us to be lights in the darkness? Where does God currently have you? Who does God currently have in close proximity to you? What group of people has God given you the unique ability to love and serve? There are people in your life that don't know any other Christian, that isn't going to rub shoulders with anybody else who loves Jesus this week. You're the only one. God puts certain people in certain places at certain times. It's easy to look at this and be like, man, Joseph was promoted, and it's easy even to look around and say, man, maybe people who are CEOs, maybe people who have big families, maybe people who are older and have more influence or more money or whatever, maybe for them there is this additional purpose in their life. No way, man. Listen, if you have made a decision to follow Jesus, then God has placed you in a certain place at a certain time for a certain reason, and it's to be a light to those that are around you. If you are, I don't know if this hits you, if you're a financial planner, an employee recruiter, a son, a mom, a landlord, a builder, a teacher, a physical therapist, a nurse, a surgeon, a personal trainer, an administrative assistant, a student, a photographer, an engineer, a scientist, or if you are training to be on the United States Olympic wrestling team for 2028, he goes here, by the way, no matter which place God has placed you in, He placed you there on purpose. He has promoted you to that place. You might not see it as a promotion. He has promoted you to the position of teacher, promoted you to the position of neighbor, promoted you to the position of parent. It is a huge promotion in the eyes of God. Where does He have you? Who does He have you in close proximity to? Who do you have the unique ability to love and serve? I was talking with Ryan Sargent this week. He's the owner of Sargent Coffee Company, the coffee company that has their shop down in the Well. They've been open for a couple weeks now, and this week specifically, this week and last week, they just had a ton of momentum. They had all these Columbus coffee food blog people reposting all their stuff, and word's getting out, and every day there's more and more people, and it's exciting. And I have had other friends who have started coffee shops, and the only thing they can talk about in the beginning is just sales. It's just transactions. We got to get traffic. We got to make this part of people's habits. And it's just a numbers game, and you can't even hardly escape that in the beginning stages. And there was actually an article on NBC4 this week about Sargent Coffee Company. And they were asking Ryan and Brandy is the couple that own it. He said, what's your mission here? What's your purpose? He said, man, it really for me is a lot less about number of transactions, and it's really more about number of interactions that I get to have with people, remembering their order and remembering even their kids' names. I thought, man, that is so, what a great answer. And so this week, a little bit later in the week, I was talking with him. I said, Ryan, bro, what a great week. You guys are really doing a great job at getting the word out. And he said, I know, but can I tell you about the highlight of the week? I said, please. I expected him to say some Instagram person with 50,000 followers posted a picture of, Sergeant Coffee. It's really going to drive traffic. No. He said at 11:16 a.m. on Wednesday. He said, our youth pastor at Jersey was just here this morning, and he just led a new person in our church to Christ in the well. God is so good. I said, Ryan, that's unbelievable. Dude, in the middle of this promotion week and sales week and get the word out, what the world says to do, you're just rejecting that. And I said, I just said that. And I promise you that maybe Cooper and Ryan were talking, but I didn't know about this. He just texted me back. He said, do you want to know my purpose? It's all for His glory. To be completely spent for the benefit of others is my purpose. God has elevated, He has promoted Ryan to the position of Sergeant Coffee Company co-owner. And Ryan is saying that my purpose now is to be completely spent for the benefit of others in this place. Okay, so where does God have you? Who has God put around you that you have the unique ability this week to love and to serve? Let me close by praying for you. Jesus, I don't think it's random anymore. I just feel like there have been so many times where I have seen things happen in my life and I go, what a coincidence. I just don't see it that way. I believe that you put us in certain places at certain times, surrounded by certain people with a purpose to love them and serve them in a way that nobody else could. And so I pray this week for my church family that we would not take that baton that has been passed to us and drop it, but rather, God, you would help us to run forward into these spaces. You're not overlooking any of us. You're not telling anyone in the room that their role isn't important. You're promoting all of us to a specific place this week. Lord, would you help us to be so faithful with that? I pray that in Jesus' name, amen. Will you guys stand? Let's stand and let's sing and let's close. And as we sing this song, let's consider, what places has God put us this week that He wants us to be a light? Let's sing. Thanks for watching. To find out more about our church, about when and where we meet, about joining a group, about serving on a team, about giving online, you can find all of it at threecreekschurch.com.